My daughter whispered, "Dad has nothing left, we can finally put him in that cheap home." I said nothing. She turned to her husband, "Are you sure the papers are signed?" He nodded. Silence filled the room. Then my son-in-law's smile froze. "Wait. Whose name is on the deed?" My lawyer stepped forward. His. And everything they thought they owned was about to disappear. Welcome back to Dad's Cruel Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, because every villain in this story got exactly what they deserved. Be sure to subscribe and drop a comment. What would you have done in my place? My name is Walter Higgins. I am 68 years old, and 3 weeks ago I stood outside my own kitchen door and heard my daughter planning my disappearance like she was scheduling a trash pickup. Her voice was cold, efficient, rehearsed. "He's too old to fight us on this," she said. "He doesn't even check his bank statements anymore." Her husband laughed. "Perfect. Old man won't know what hit him." I stood there, coffee mug in hand, listening to my own child plan my erasure. I did not storm in. I did not confront them. I simply turned around, walked back to my car, and drove to the one place they had completely forgotten existed, my lawyer's office. Because what my daughter didn't know was simple. I wasn't broke. I was never broke. And the papers she thought were signed away from me were about to become the very weapon that destroyed her. 6 years earlier, I made a decision that would save me. After my wife passed, I watched my daughter Emily change. She stopped calling to ask how I was. She started calling to ask what I was worth. "Dad, have you thought about estate planning?" became her favorite sentence. I smiled and said, "Working on it, sweetheart." What I was actually working on, she never knew. I had spent 31 years running a small contracting business. Quiet, unglamorous, cash flow positive every single year. While Emily assumed I was living on Social Security and fumes, I was quietly buying rental properties under an LLC she'd never heard of. 4 duplexes. A small strip mall. A storage facility. All invisible on paper to anyone who only looked at my personal checking account, which was, conveniently, the only account Emily ever snooped through. Her husband Derek lost his job in logistics 2 years ago and never fully recovered. Their debt piled up fast, credit cards, a car loan, a second mortgage they took without telling me. I knew because my lawyer, Grace Whitfield, quietly tracked public filings for me. "They're drowning, Walter," she told me last spring. "And I think they're looking at you as a life raft." I nodded. "Then let's make sure the raft has a hole they can't see." By January, Emily's visits became frequent again, suspiciously frequent. She'd show up with groceries I didn't ask for, sit at my table, and steer every conversation toward the same question. "Dad, where do you keep your important documents?" I'd wave my hand. "Somewhere safe, don't you worry about that." She'd smile too tightly and change the subject. Derek started coming too, always with a new angle. "You know, Dad, places like Meadowbrook Senior Living are actually really nice now. Full medical staff. Community events." I almost laughed in his face. Meadowbrook was a facility I'd toured once for a client understaffed, underfunded, the kind of place people went to be forgotten. "Sounds expensive," I said instead. Derek's eyes lit up. "Don't worry about that part. We'll handle everything." That was the moment I understood the full shape of their plan. Get me declared unable to manage my own finances. Get power of attorney. Sell my house. Pocket the difference between what Meadowbrook cost and what my estate was worth. They assumed my estate was a modest house and a thin savings account. They had no idea my real estate portfolio alone was worth 11 times that. I let them keep assuming. Grace had already begun building a case file documenting every manipulative visit, every suspicious question, every forged signature attempt. The forged signature attempt came in March, and it was almost elegant in its stupidity. Derek handed me a folder at Sunday dinner. "Just some paperwork to simplify your taxes, Dad. Sign here, here, and here." I flipped through it slowly while he watched me like a hawk watches a field mouse. It wasn't a tax form. It was a limited power of attorney, buried under legal jargon designed to look boring enough that no one would actually read it. I almost admired the attempt. Instead of refusing, I smiled. Let me have Grace look this over first. You know how I am with paperwork since the surgery. Derek's jaw tightened. It's really just a formality, Dad. Then she'll approve it in a day, I said pleasantly. Grace reviewed it that night and called me laughing. Walter, this document would have given Derek full authority to sell any property in your name within 72 hours of signing. I wasn't laughing. I was furious, in the quiet way that doesn't show on my face. So what do we do? I asked. Grace's voice turned sharp. We don't refuse anything. We let them believe it worked. And then we make sure every property they think they're circling belongs to a trust they will never be able to touch. Within 2 weeks, every property I owned was restructured into an irrevocable trust under my late wife's maiden name as the trustee entity, a name Emily hadn't heard since childhood. My house, the one they were circling like vultures, was deeded entirely to the trust. On paper, Walter Higgins now owned almost nothing. Exactly what Emily wanted to see. I handed Derek's power of attorney back to him with a sigh. Grace says it's fine, I signed it. His eyes gleamed with victory he hadn't earned. Smart move, Dad. I nodded. Figured it's time I stopped worrying about all this. What he didn't know was that the document now gave him authority over assets that legally no longer existed in my name. Emily started talking openly now, no longer bothering to whisper around me. Meadowbrook has an opening next month, she told Derek at dinner, not realizing I could hear every word from the hallway. Once he's in, we list the house immediately. Derek grinned. Should clear 60, 70 grand after the mortgage. I stood in that hallway, hand pressed against the wall, and felt something harden inside my chest. Not sadness. Something colder. Something that had been building for 6 years and was finally ready to surface. The tour of Meadowbrook happened on a Tuesday. Emily drove me there herself, chattering the entire way about how peaceful it would be, how I'd finally get to relax. The facility smelled like bleach and sadness. A woman in the hallway called out for help that no one answered. I said nothing. I simply nodded along, playing the role of a tired old man ready to surrender. That night, Emily sat me down with a stack of papers. Dad, we just need your signature here for the deposit, and here for the house listing authorization. Her hand was steady. Mine trembled slightly on purpose. It's a lot to take in, I said softly. She squeezed my hand with a tenderness that made my stomach turn, knowing what it was actually made of. I know, Dad. But this is what's best for you. I signed. Every line. Because Grace had already confirmed the house listing authorization referenced a deed that no longer existed under my name. Legally, Derek and Emily were about to list a property they had zero authority to sell. 2 days later, a real estate sign went up on my lawn without my knowledge. Emily texted me a photo. Exciting times ahead, Dad. I stared at that text for a long time. Then I called Grace. It's time, I said. Grace filed the paperwork within the week, a formal cease and desist against the unauthorized listing, combined with a full disclosure letter establishing the trust's legal ownership. But I wanted more than a legal letter. I wanted them to hear it from my own mouth, in front of witnesses, in a moment they couldn't twist or erase later. I called a family dinner. Emily was thrilled, assuming I wanted to say goodbye to the house. She invited her brother Nathan, who'd been suspiciously absent from all of this, likely because he actually still called me just to talk. She also invited her in-laws, wanting an audience for her victory. I invited someone too. Grace. The table was set beautifully. Emily raised a glass. To new beginnings, for all of us. Derek clinked his glass against hers, already mentally spending money that was never going to be his. I let the toast finish. I let the silence settle. Then I set down my fork and said, calmly, before we celebrate, I think we should clarify a few things about that house you're selling. Emily's smile flickered. What do you mean? I turned to the door. Grace, would you like to explain? Grace walked in like she'd been waiting in the wings the entire evening, because she had. She placed a folder on the table and opened it slowly. The property currently listed for sale, she said, is not owned by Walter Higgins. It hasn't been for 6 weeks. Derek's fork froze halfway to his mouth. What are you talking about? He signed the authorization. Grace nodded. He signed a document authorizing the sale of a property he no longer legally owns. Which means the listing itself is fraudulent. Emily's face drained of color. That's not Dad. What is she talking about? I leaned back in my chair. Remember that power of attorney you had me sign, Derek? The one you called just a formality? Funny thing about formalities, they only work if there's something left to control. Derek's voice cracked. Wait. Whose name is on the deed? Grace answered before I could. His. Then she slid a second document across the table. Along with 4 duplexes, a strip mall, and a storage facility. All held in an irrevocable trust that cannot be touched, contested, or sold by anyone but him. The room went completely silent. Nathan set down his glass slowly, watching his sister's entire scheme collapse in real time. That's impossible, Emily whispered, snatching the papers from the table. Her eyes scanned line after line, searching for a loophole that didn't exist. You don't have this kind of money. You've never had this kind of money. I watched her realize, in real time, how little she actually knew about the man she'd been planning to discard. I built it while you were deciding I was too old to manage my own affairs, I said quietly. Every weekend I told you I was fixing up the garage, I was actually meeting with contractors, reviewing leases, closing deals. Derek stood up so fast his chair scraped backward. This is insane. We have a buyer lined up. We have a deposit on Meadowbrook. Grace's voice was ice. Then I suggest you refund that deposit immediately, because continuing to represent yourselves as authorized sellers of a property you don't own constitutes real estate fraud. I have already notified the county recorder's office of the discrepancy. The word fraud hit the table like a dropped plate. Emily's hands were shaking. Dad, please, we can explain, we were just trying to help you, I cut her off, my voice flat and final. You were trying to help yourselves. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. The weeks that followed moved faster than Emily could control. The real estate agent, once she learned the listing was fraudulent, immediately withdrew and reported the attempted sale to her broker. The buyer Emily bragged about backed out the moment their attorney caught wind of the title discrepancy. Meadowbrook's deposit, non-refundable, as it turned out, buried in fine print Derek never bothered reading, was gone for good. Their existing debts, the ones they'd assumed my house money would cover, came due with nothing to soften the blow. Derek's second mortgage application, which depended on projected inheritance as collateral reasoning to the private lender, collapsed entirely once the lender discovered there was no inheritance coming. Their credit cards maxed out. Collection calls started. Nathan, who'd watched the entire dinner in stunned silence, called me 2 days later. Dad, I had no idea what they were planning. I'm so sorry. I believed him. He'd always called just to talk, never to ask about money. I know, son, I said. This doesn't change anything between us. Emily, meanwhile, sent me message after message that I didn't answer. Apologies mixed with accusations, guilt mixed with desperation. I let every one go unread. Some silences are their own verdict. Emily showed up at my door 3 weeks later, uninvited, mascara streaked down her face. Dad, please, we're losing the house. Our house. Derek might lose his new job before he even starts because of the fraud report. I stood in the doorway and didn't invite her in. That's between you and the consequences of your choices. You're really going to let your own daughter end up on the street? She snapped, anger replacing desperation in an instant, which told me everything about how genuine the desperation ever was. I didn't put you there, Emily, I said calmly. You did that the moment you decided my life was worth less than my assets. I watched something break behind her eyes, not remorse, but the final collapse of a plan she never imagined could fail. I trusted you completely, I continued, and you spent 6 years planning how to discard me the moment it became convenient. That's not something I forgive over a cup of coffee. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, realizing there was nothing left to say that would change anything. I closed the door gently. Not slammed. Gently. Because rage wasn't what she deserved anymore. Indifference was. 6 months later, I sold the strip mall and used the proceeds to fully renovate one of my duplexes into a home that actually suited me, bright, modern, entirely mine, nowhere near the house Emily and Derek had once circled like prey. Grace finalized the trust restructuring to ensure nothing I owned could ever again be touched by a signature slipped into a simplifying folder. Derek's new job fell through exactly as the fraud investigation predicted it might. Emily and Derek lost their own house to foreclosure 4 months after that dinner, the weight of debts they'd assumed my money would erase finally catching up to them completely. I heard they moved in with Derek's parents. I felt nothing when I heard it. Not satisfaction, not guilt. Just the quiet certainty that every consequence landed exactly where it was earned. Nathan visits every Sunday now. We grill on my new patio and talk about nothing important, which is the most important thing there is. Emily sent one final letter last month, asking for a fresh start. I read it once. I did not reply. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt, they're meant to stay burned, as a permanent reminder of what greed costs. I am 69 years old now, and for the first time in 6 years, my life belongs entirely to me.